Hi everybody, it's Kim from Patriot Garden, and today we're going to talk about midsummer blues and things that make you want to throw in the towel. Midsummer is generally the time when things start to go wrong. Our plants don't look quite as healthy as they did in the beginning. The work starts to pile up. We start to get a little bit discouraged. So I'm going to talk about 6 things today that make new gardeners just question everything and make you want to give up. And then I'm going to talk about 6 fixes. The first thing we're going to talk about today is weird things happening with your plants. People look at this and think like an alien is coming out of their tomato plants, when really there's a very simple explanation. Tomato plants are a vine, remember, and so their natural tendency is to do what this one's doing and just reach to the top of your trellis and then curve around and go down. At some point, the plant starts to put out those little tiny roots from the sides of the vine in anticipation of actually meeting the dirt, because wherever a tomato vine will hit the dirt, it will root. So those weird things coming out of your tomato plants, just ignore them. The tomato plant is doing what it's supposed to do. Now, the next thing that is so frustrating to gardeners is deformation of the fruit. So here we have a tomato that has some blossom end rot on it. And here we have a tomato with what we call cat face. Both of these conditions can be caused by a watering deficiency, too much water, not enough calcium in the soil, and also pollination issues. And pollination issues can come from a variety of things. Too many leaves that hide the plant from the pollinator, or weather that is too hot or too cold. Now, tomatoes are not the only fruit that gets affected by a mineral deficiency or a water deficiency or just a pollination issue. I see on social media a lot of people getting freaked out by the shapes of their cucumbers. They look like they're going to be a perfectly formed cucumber, and then the blossom end gets small and curls up, and they're wondering what happened to the shape of their cucumber. We'll talk about this at the end of the video when we talk about fixes. The third thing that makes new gardeners absolutely want to give up is when their tomato plants start showing signs of blight. This particular blight is called Septoria. It is called Septoria Leaf Spot, and it's caused by a fungus. It is very contagious, which means once one leaf starts to get it, it will spread, and it actually will take down a plant if untreated. Now, at this point, it is a race to the finish between me and Septoria. And at the end of this video, when we talk about fixes, you'll learn some ways to just deal with this problem in the garden. Here is also an example of some blight on my cucumber leaves causing this yellowing. But as you can see, my cucumber is still producing fruit. So I'm just going to keep going with my treatments for this plant and hope that I can make the plant healthy enough to last for the growing season. There's also an issue with cucumber leaves called bacterial wilt. And you'll actually see a very healthy looking leaf just totally wilt and look lifeless. Now, I don't have an example, thank goodness, in my garden of that. You can look that up on Google, but that would be another issue of bacteria or fungus attacking a plant right in the middle of the season when all the fruit is starting to come in. Now, the next thing, the fourth thing that makes new gardeners very frustrated is all the pest damage that happens in the middle of the season. Now, this purple sprouting broccoli was actually netted for most of its life, but a few of the moths got underneath the netting and caused a lot of damage. Something's also eating the leaves of my kale. This is red Russian kale, and somebody's having quite a snack on that. And then, of course, Japanese beetles. They're turning my grapevine into lace. Now remember, pests have a life cycle. So there are a couple of fixes and a couple of things that I'll help you with at the end of this video when it comes to not giving up with all the pest damage in your garden. The fifth thing is dropping blossoms or dropping fruit. These tomatoes simply fell off the vine. I think I was pruning and working in the garden and just shaking the plant. All of these just came down. Of course, some of them are ripening in the garden and they're still good to eat. The falling fruit and the falling blossoms was also happening to my pepper plants inside my small little hoop house greenhouse. And I discovered that it was not actually something that I was doing that was causing that. Again, that was totally out of my control, and we'll talk about that in the fixes part of this video. Now, the last thing, the sixth thing that we're going to talk about is when you see obvious damage of some sort of an animal biting into your leaves. Eating up your squash plants. Digging and scratching into your potato plot, and just walking through your squash and pumpkin patch. Although, honestly, I think the lawn guy did this. Now, to handle those problems with Septoria and animals eating your plants, and I think most of that damage was actually done by my chickens, and that's an easy fix. I just shoo them out of the garden. But having a good animal repellent on hand is really good for those times when you have an unexpected visitor on your property that's making a snack out of your plants. When it comes to things like Septoria, fungal and bacterial disease on your leaves, there's a few things that I use. When it gets really super bad, I use this copper fungicide. This is a really good quick fix, but I would advise against using this a lot because the copper can build up in your soil. So what I've been doing is actually using some common household products to work on that problem. And again, I'm not looking to eradicate Septoria. That fungus comes from the soil and it's here to stay unless I do something really major to the soil. What I'm looking to do is control it long enough so that I can reap a harvest. So I have been using a combination of hydrogen peroxide spray and good old baking soda. And let me tell you what I do. Day one, I use a spray of 1 heaping tablespoon of baking soda, a tablespoon of vegetable oil, and some dish soap in a 1-gallon jug of water. I make sure that I do this on a dry day. You don't want to do this and then have the rain come and wash everything off. The next day I follow up with a spray that it is 4 teaspoons of hydrogen peroxide in a gallon jug of water. No emulsifiers, just the hydrogen peroxide and water. Now I do the baking soda spray day one. That changes the pH of the leaf so that the Septoria doesn't feel comfortable living there, and then the hydrogen peroxide will get rid of the fungus that's on the leaf. This is a control, not a cure. After you do day 1 of baking soda and day 2 of hydrogen peroxide, give your plants a chance to rest for a good week and then do that again. Now remember, the very first thing you should do, especially if you've done no pruning, it's buggy out here tonight. If you've done no pruning yet, pruning is probably the first thing you want to do before you start your spraying regimen, is to get those diseased and affected leaves off your plants. I do a lot of pruning on my tomato plants. I have single stem about 2.5 feet up. And so at this point, I'm not even taking off a full leaf if it's affected. I'm just taking those little leaflets. But when my squash plants get affected by downy mildew or powdery mildew, and there's only a couple of leaves, I simply snip them off. If my cucumbers have some bacterial wilt, I simply snip them off. But eventually that's going to catch up and I'm going to have to start some sort of a spraying regimen. Okay, so now what do you do in the middle of all this craziness in midsummer so that you don't throw in the towel? Well, first of all, do not panic. The worst that can happen is a plant dies, you pull it out. And hopefully now you've learned that you should keep seeds and seedlings at the ready to replace a plant that you need to take out. If you know what your first frost date is, for instance, here in Connecticut, Zone 6B, our first frost date is about October 10th. And I knew a couple of weeks ago that that gave me about 70 days to grow something new. So I started some cold hardy plants like kale. I put in more carrot seeds. I put in more beet seeds. I even started some zucchini because I think I have enough time to get a small variety of zucchini or yellow squash to harvest before the frost. Number 2, make sure that your spray regimen is ready to go. And don't be afraid to prune those plants and take off any diseased leaves. That goes for powdery and downy mildew. That goes for bacterial wilt on your cucumbers and Septoria or any other fungal disease on your tomatoes. Be careful not to over prune, but don't feel bad about taking any diseased leaves off. And remember, don't leave them in your garden and don't put them in your compost pile. Either burn them or throw them deep into the woods. Number 3 is, if you haven't already, add some calcium to your plants. Put a little ground eggshells, dig them into the first couple of inches, because calcium is going to help with some of those deformity problems, things like blossom end rot. And when it comes to those problems, remember, a lot of it is out of your control. We had record cool temperatures and a lot of rain here in July, and I'm going to attribute my deformed cucumbers and my blossom end rot and my cat-faced tomato to those issues. I can't do anything about that. I just have to deal with them. Those cool temperatures were probably also responsible for the dropping of tomatoes and pepper blossoms. Those plants need heat, and July just was not giving them the heat. Nature also gives pests a life cycle. I'll leave a link to a video that I made on sprays for insects, but you know what? Sometimes you just need to work around nature. So one of the things I did with my kale plants is to just strip off the leaves, and I will just continue to do that and let it grow into frost, and my kale plant will outlive those insects. Number 4, make sure your pollinators can find your flowers. Prune your plants. Make sure the flowers are accessible to them. Make sure that you're doing everything to encourage pollinators in your garden. And make sure that if you're doing a spraying regimen for any of those bacterial or fungal infections, that you're not spraying directly into the flowers, that you're not spraying when your pollinators are active, and that you're targeting the leaves that are infected. Number 5, always know what the watering and feeding needs of your plants are, so you don't risk overfeeding or overwatering or underwatering. Take your cue from your plants. The only thing I'll warn about is if it's a real hot day and your tomatoes leaves are curling upward, don't rush for the hose. That usually just means that it's protecting itself by reducing the surface area of the leaf so it doesn't lose the moisture that it has too quickly. I think if you wait till the cool of the evening or the next morning, you'll find that that problem fixes itself. And number 6, keep a journal. A journal will help you analyze cycles in your garden, cycles of pests, cycles of disease, cycles of growth, so that you can plan to avoid some of that stuff in the next year. Remember, your garden is your classroom. What doesn't work this year, you can fix for next year. It's important that you just don't give up. Okay, everybody, thanks for watching today. Thanks for helping this channel grow. If you liked what you saw today or if it was helpful, please subscribe, leave a comment, leave a like, and keep watching the channel. We have a lot of great content coming up. Happy gardening, everybody.